The site went dark while I was watching it live. 1 second listings were loading. The next the screen froze, then vanished like it had never existed. No warning. No goodbye message. Just gone. People online panicked instantly. Forums lit up with one question over and over again. If Silk Road is dead, what comes next? That question scared me more than Silk Road ever did. Because when something that big disappears, it never leaves a vacuum. Something always moves in to replace it. And this time, it felt different. Quieter. Smarter. Almost patient. I had been studying dark web markets for a class project. Nothing illegal, just patterns and history. Silk Road was supposed to be the end of an era. The big example. The lesson governments would point to and say, "See, crime doesn't win." But as weeks passed, I noticed something strange. There were fewer big markets, fewer flashy homepages. Instead, everything fragmented. Smaller sites. Invite-only access. No Google-style search bars. No trust badges. No public reviews. You didn't browse anymore. You were invited. And if you didn't know the right person, you didn't exist. That's when the messages started. Short. Cold. Anonymous. No usernames. No emojis. Just lines like, "Stop looking." Or, "You're late to the party." At first, I thought someone was messing with me. But then one message included a screenshot from my own screen, taken seconds earlier. My stomach dropped. Whoever replaced Silk Road wasn't loud. They were watching. I dug deeper, not because I was brave, but because I was already in too far. Old Silk Road vendors weren't gone. They'd scattered. Some vanished. Some rebranded. Some merged into networks instead of markets. No single king anymore. Just cells. And the scary part? These new platforms didn't just sell things. They sold protection, anonymity packages, legal shields, data erasers. One service promised that if you used them, your name would never exist again. That wasn't a marketplace. That was power. The tone had changed too. Silk Road felt reckless in hindsight. This new wave felt professional. No ideology. No speeches about freedom. Just results. Fast replies. Strict rules. And harsh punishment if you broke them. One forum post explained it clearly. Silk Road taught us what not to do. That line stuck with me, because it meant they had learned. From mistakes. From arrests. From deaths. By the end of that night, I realized something unsettling. The fall of Silk Road didn't scare the dark web. It trained it. What came after wasn't louder or bigger. It was quieter, sharper, and far harder to touch. And as I closed my laptop, one last message appeared on my screen, blinking once before disappearing forever. "You're asking the right questions. Just don't ask them out loud." I tried to step back after that message, told myself this was just research, curiosity, nothing more. But the internet has a way of pulling you forward when you already know too much. The next day, old forums I'd bookmarked were gone. Dead links. Archived pages wiped clean. But in their place were mirrors, quiet copies, hidden behind layers of access, shared only through trust. I noticed a pattern. Everyone kept mentioning services, not markets, not vendors. Services. That word showed up everywhere, like it meant something new now. And the people talking about them weren't bragging. They were careful, almost respectful. Like you talk about something powerful you don't fully control. One post caught my eye because it wasn't selling anything. It was a warning. The writer said the new dark web wasn't about buying things anymore. It was about becoming untouchable. That word again. Untouchable. According to them, the next frontier wasn't drugs or weapons. It was identity itself. If Silk Road sold products, this new world sold erasure. Clean histories. Disappearing records. Legal noise, so loud it buried the truth. The kind of systems that didn't fight the law, they drowned it. I followed a trail that night. Not links exactly, more like references. People never posted direct access. They posted riddles, half sentences, timestamps. You had to already understand how things worked to even read them correctly. And slowly, a picture formed. Instead of one big market, there were layers. Entry layers. Vetting layers. Reputation layers. Each one filtered people out. Most never made it past the first step. Those who didn't talk much. They didn't need to. What scared me wasn't what they claimed to offer. It was who they claimed to serve. Politicians. Corporate fixers. Financial ghosts. People who didn't want drugs. They wanted silence. Problems gone. Stories buried. Laws delayed until they expired. One comment said, "If Silk Road was a store, this is a system." And systems don't shut down when one server goes dark. Then I saw something that made me close my browser and just sit there. Someone mentioned a case I recognized from the news. A corruption investigation that had suddenly collapsed with no explanation. Witnesses vanished. Paper trails lost. At the time, everyone blamed incompetence. But now, reading these posts, it didn't feel random anymore. It felt engineered. Like Silk Road's replacement wasn't hiding from the world, it was blending into it. I realized then why there were no flashy websites anymore. No logos. No brands. Brands attract attention. What came after Silk Road didn't want attention. It wanted influence. And influence doesn't shout. It whispers, waits, and moves things just enough that no one notices until it's too late. That's when the thought hit me hard and wouldn't let go. Maybe the most dangerous part of the dark web isn't what you can buy anymore. It's what you can erase. The deeper I went, the more I understood why no one talked openly anymore. People weren't scared of being caught buying something illegal. They were scared of being noticed by the wrong service. One forum thread ended abruptly mid-sentence, like the writer just vanished. Another user replied hours later with only 3 words. He asked wrong. No explanation. No jokes. The conversation moved on like nothing happened. That silence felt louder than any threat. I started noticing how carefully everyone behaved. No arguing. No ego. No flexing. On Silk Road, people used to argue over prices, reviews, politics. Here, nobody wasted words. Every post felt measured, calculated, as if someone was always watching, not to shut things down, but to decide who was worth keeping around. One message stuck with me. The new system doesn't ban you, it forgets you. That sentence made my skin crawl. Then I stumbled onto something that felt like a line I wasn't meant to cross. A private discussion about a service that didn't just erase data online, but influenced reality. Court delays. Lost evidence. Witnesses suddenly unavailable. The writer claimed they didn't hack systems directly. They nudged people. Lawyers. Clerks. Middlemen. Everything stayed legal on paper. Nothing traceable. No crime scene. Just outcomes. And the scariest part? They said it was cheaper than hiring a good attorney. I tried to convince myself this was exaggeration. Dark web myths grow fast. People love to sound powerful. But then someone posted proof. Not files, not screenshots, but timelines. Before and after. A scandal that should have exploded quietly disappeared. A business investigation that stalled for years until no one cared. I recognized another one. A missing person case from a small town that had made headlines, then faded. At the time, it felt tragic. Now it felt managed. That's when I realized Silk Road had been obvious. Loud crimes attract loud attention. What replaced it wasn't trying to fight the system. It was using it, feeding it just enough truth to look clean while shaping outcomes behind the scenes. No drugs on a homepage. No listings. Just access. And access was everything. I felt a strange pressure then, like the internet had gotten smaller around me. Every click felt heavier. Every pause longer. I wasn't being threatened, not directly. But I understood the message clearly now. This wasn't a place for curiosity. It was a place for people who already knew what they wanted erased. And once you saw how it worked, you couldn't unsee it. I shut everything down that night. Router. Laptop. Phone. But even in the silence, one thought stayed with me. Sharp and uncomfortable. Silk Road had shown the world what the dark web could sell. What came after was showing the world what it could control. I stayed away for a few days, but the stories followed me into real life. News articles felt different now. Headlines about cases being dropped, investigations paused, people quietly stepping down for personal reasons. Before, I would have scrolled past. Now I saw the gaps, the timing, the way certain names never came up again. It felt like watching ripples on the surface of water, knowing something heavy had moved underneath. When I finally logged back in, the tone had shifted again. Fewer warnings. More confidence. It was like the system had settled into place. People weren't asking if these services worked anymore. They were asking how early they should use them. One post said, "You don't fix problems here. You prevent them from becoming problems." That line hit hard. Prevention meant planning. Long-term thinking. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. I noticed something else too. The people talking weren't random criminals. They sounded educated, calm, some even polite. They discussed contracts, timelines, risk margins. Not illegal acts, outcomes. Always outcomes. Someone joked that the new dark web didn't break laws. It exhausted them, made them trip over paperwork until nothing moved. And everyone laughed. Not with emojis, just with silence and agreement. Then came the part that made my chest tighten. A user asked what happens if someone tries to expose the system. Not attack it. Just talk about it publicly. The reply was instant. Exposure requires attention. Attention can be redirected. No threat. No drama. Just a statement of fact. Another user added, "Silk Road fell because it wanted to be seen. This doesn't." And that was it. Conversation over. I realized then why there would never be another Silk Road. No single target. No founder to arrest. No trial to make an example of. What came after had no face. No leader. Just layers of trust and influence woven into places that already existed. Courts. Companies. Media cycles. All legal. All boring. All unstoppable. For the first time, I understood the real evolution. The dark web hadn't gone deeper underground. It had moved sideways into the cracks of normal life. And the scariest part wasn't that it existed. It was that most people would never notice it at all. As I logged out again, one last thought kept looping in my mind, heavier than before. Silk Road was dangerous because of what it sold. What replaced it was dangerous because of what it made disappear. After that, I started asking myself a question that wouldn't leave me alone. Who was really using this? Not in theory. In reality. Because systems like this don't survive on curiosity. They survive on demand. And the more I looked, the clearer it became that the demand wasn't coming from the shadows. It was coming from places that looked clean on the surface. Offices with glass walls. Boardrooms. Campaign headquarters. Places where mistakes aren't forgiven, only buried. One discussion broke it down in a way that felt too honest. A user explained that these services weren't for criminals running from the law. They were for people trying to stay ahead of it. Executives facing whistleblowers. Investors dealing with inconvenient journalists. Politicians with skeletons that couldn't afford daylight. The goal wasn't to erase everything. Just enough. Delay here. Discredit there. Change the narrative before it ever formed. Reading it felt like watching someone explain a magic trick while smiling. The really unsettling part was how normal it all sounded. No panic. No urgency. Just planning. One post compared it to insurance. You hope you never need it, but once you do, you're grateful it's already there. Another said, "The mistake is waiting until you're in trouble." That line stuck with me, because it meant people were signing up long before anything went wrong, preparing silence in advance. I also noticed how carefully trust was managed. You couldn't just pay and disappear. You were watched, evaluated. If you talked too much, asked the wrong questions, or drew attention, you were cut off. Not banned, just unreachable. Services stopped replying. Access links expired. People stopped mentioning you. It was like social death. And everyone understood the rule. Don't push it. At that point, I understood the final lesson Silk Road had taught its successors. Visibility is weakness. Attention is risk. The new frontier didn't chase users. It filtered them. And the people who passed through weren't reckless. They were powerful enough to need quiet solutions. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall, realizing how small the old image of the dark web really was. Drugs, guns, fake IDs. Those were just symptoms. What came after Silk Road wasn't a market. It was a service economy built on influence, silence, and patience. And once that idea clicked, I knew the story wasn't about crime anymore. It was about control and who gets to stay untouchable. I started to see the pattern in how these services talked about risk. They didn't promise safety. They promised distance. Distance between you and consequences. Between events and accountability. One post explained it like this. The goal isn't to win the game. It's to never be on the board. That line made everything else make sense. Silk Road users knew they were playing a dangerous game. The new users didn't see it as a game at all. They saw it as maintenance. There were stories shared quietly, always secondhand. A journalist who suddenly changed beats after months of digging. A lawsuit that lost momentum because key documents were misfiled. A regulator reassigned right before signing something important. No one claimed credit. No one bragged. The tone was almost bored. Like these outcomes were expected, not celebrated. That scared me more than any threat ever could. I also noticed how time was used as a weapon. Nothing happened fast. Delays stacked on delays. Meetings postponed. Reviews extended. Appeals dragged out. People lost interest. The public moved on. And when attention died, so did accountability. One comment said, outrage has a shelf life. We just help it expire. Simple. Cold. Effective. Then there was the part no one liked to talk about directly. What happens when someone breaks the rules? Not law rules. Their rules. No violence was mentioned. No hacking. Just isolation. Connections cut. Support gone. Allies silent. In a world built on access, losing access was everything. One user summed it up in a sentence that still echoes in my head. You don't get punished. You get alone. I realized then why these systems could survive pressure from governments. They didn't fight back. They didn't react. They waited. Governments change. People rotate out. Budgets shift. Attention fades. Patience, it turns out, is more powerful than speed. Silk Road burned bright and fast. What came after learned to move slowly and last. As the hours passed, I felt a strange mix of clarity and unease. This wasn't about hidden websites anymore. It was about how power adapts. When one door closes, it doesn't disappear. It finds another way in. Quieter. Cleaner. Wrapped in legality and time. And the more I understood it, the more one thought kept pressing in from the back of my mind. If this is what replaced Silk Road, then the most dangerous part of the dark web isn't underground at all. It's learning how to live in plain sight, without ever being touched. By this point, I stopped thinking about websites and started thinking about habits. Because nothing I was reading depended on special tech anymore. It depended on people doing what they already do, just nudged in the right direction. The dark web hadn't invented corruption. It had learned how to guide it quietly. That's why it felt impossible to fight. You can shut down a site. You can arrest a founder. But how do you arrest a delay? How do you charge a system that never touches anything directly? I noticed something else that made my stomach tighten. These services weren't just reactive. They were predictive. People talked about risk windows and future exposure. Meaning they weren't cleaning up messes. They were preparing for stories that hadn't even broken yet. One post said, if you wait for headlines, you're already late. That meant some of the biggest events we see explode publicly may already be filtered versions of the truth. Not lies. Just trimmed. Softened. Redirected. There was a moment where I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly simple. Someone asked why law enforcement couldn't stop this if it was so powerful. The answer came back fast. Because nothing illegal happened. That was it. No hacking. No threats. No transactions that looked criminal on paper. Just influence, time, and people doing what they could justify as normal work. That answer scared me more than any talk of violence ever could. I started to understand why Silk Road had to die publicly. It was too visible. Too easy to point at. Its replacement learned that the safest place to hide isn't the shadows, it's inside routine. Inside systems people trust by default. And once something becomes routine, nobody questions it anymore. I caught myself wondering how many stories I'd already consumed that had been shaped this way. How many times I'd accepted case dropped or no further comment without asking why. That thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet and heavy, like realizing the rules of a game after you've been playing it for years. By then, I knew I was looking at the edge of the story, not the end. Because the dark web didn't stop evolving after Silk Road. It matured, and maturity doesn't announce itself. It settles in, becomes efficient, and waits. The real question wasn't what came after Silk Road anymore. The real question was this: if these systems are already woven into normal life, how would we ever know when they've gone too far? That question stayed with me long after I closed everything for good. Because once you see the pattern, you start realizing there may never be a moment where someone steps forward and says, "This is too far." Systems like this don't collapse. They normalize. They become part of how things work. Quiet fixes, soft landings, stories that end without answers. And over time, people stop expecting answers at all. I thought back to Silk Road and how loud it was, how public, how shocking. It gave people something clear to hate, something easy to point at and destroy. But what came after learned the most dangerous lesson of all: don't be obvious. Don't be extreme. Don't be fast. Just be useful. Useful enough that powerful people rely on you. And once they do, you don't need protection. You are the protection. That's when it hit me. The dark web's next frontier isn't a website, or a market, or even a network. It's a mindset. A way of solving problems without leaving fingerprints. A way of shaping reality just enough that no one thinks to question it. And the scariest part isn't that criminals use it. It's that it works best for people who already look clean. Silk Road showed us what happens when crime goes online. What came after showed us what happens when influence does. No arrests. No headlines. No dramatic takedowns. Just silence where there should have been noise. And silence, when you think about it, is the hardest thing to prove. I don't know how far it goes now. Maybe no one does. Maybe that's the point. But I do know this. If the next generation of the dark web is built on being untouchable, then the real danger isn't hidden behind encryption anymore. It's hiding inside systems we trust every day. And if Silk Road was the warning shot, what came after didn't need to warn anyone at all.